Hello friends, today we're going to discuss about categorical versus dimensional approach in personality disorders. I am Dr. Suresh Badadmat, Professor of Psychiatry, working at National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore. In this video, I'll be discussing about the approach regarding personality disorder, whether we should consider categorical approach or dimensional approach. What is the main difference? What are the pros and cons approaching either categorical or dimensional personality disorder? Which is the best? Will be discussed in this video. Let's define personality. Personality refers to the enduring characteristics and behavior that comprises a person's unique adjustment to life, major traits, interest, drives, values, self-concept, abilities, and emotional patterns. This is a very complex definition of personality. Personality is also defined as a characteristic way of thinking, attitude, opinions, feelings, and behaviors towards self, others, and the environment around him. Let's understand the trait. Trait can be defined as habitual patterns of behavior, thoughts, and emotion. Trait is relatively stable characteristics that causes individuals to behave in certain ways across time and consistent across different situations. The combination and interaction of various traits forms a personality that is unique to a person. That means the personality is made up of bouquet of traits. The traits may be different to different people. Trait theory is focused on identifying, measuring these individual personality characteristic or traits to define what kind of a person he is. Traits are quantifiable, predictable, and measured by various scales and instruments. The first theory of trait was proposed by Gordon Allport in 1936. Allport tried to find out the characteristics of a person explained in a dictionary. He was able to come out more than 44,000 words were used to describe a person or a personality trait. And finally, he categorized these traits into three important groups: cardinal, central, and secondary traits. I made a separate video to understand about these traits. Please visit my YouTube channel. Let's move on to the categorical classification of personality disorders. As you know, personality means enduring characteristics, which is unique to person with regard to feelings, emotions, behaviors towards self, others, and the environment. Now, if you are going to make a categorical classification of personality disorder, how they are made? Categorical classification of personality refers to the individuals can be classified into discrete categories based on the presence or absence of personality characteristic, future traits, or symptoms. For example, if a person has paranoid traits, impulsivity traits, breaking rules, rigid, and so forth. So that means either they have this symptom or not. That means it is based on symptom presence or absence. Raymond Kettle reduced the number of main personality traits from Gordon Allport, which I mentioned 4,000 to 171. Further, by using statistical tool, a factor analysis reduced his list to 16 personality traits. Then the categorical model was introduced, looking at the similarity of the symptoms. Hans Eysenck developed a model of personality based on just three universal traits, that is, introversion or extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism. These trait theories were subject to research and finally yielded with the five factor theories to form dimensional personality disorders. Five factor theory was researched extensively across the globe, and I'll be discussing about that. With regard to categorical classification of personality disorder, 10 personality disorders have been explained under ICD 10. These are those personality disorders which are mentioned under ICD 10. They are paranoid, schizoid, antisocial, borderline, histrionic, obsessive compulsive, anxious avoidant, dependent, other, and narcissistic personality disorder. If you look at the DSM V classification of personality disorder, still it is a categorical. They are classified into three clusters: cluster A, B, and C. If you look into the cluster A, they form the odd eccentric behavior, such as paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal. If you look into the cluster B, they are dramatic and erratic personality disorders, such as antisocial personality disorder, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic. If you look into the cluster C, it is anxious and fearful, avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. If you look at the personality disorders, how they have evolved over a period of time from DSM 1 1952 to DSM 5 2013. If you look at the first group, again, the first time when it was introduced as a personality disorder, you can see how they have been classified. Further, in DSM 2, DSM 3, and even in DSM 5, the categorical model of personality disorder is retained. Here, the presence and absence of symptoms will be considered mainly. However, one need to understand this. At the time, statistical analysis was not to that level. They categorize the person based upon the presentation or the cardinal symptom I can put across. However, certain personality disorders were removed, such as one of the important, which we can be considered as dissocial PD, was removed in DSM 1, asthenic personality disorder in DSM 2, and also inadequate personality disorder and passive aggressive in DSM 3. Some of the personality disorders were completely removed because there was no research, and even clinically, the validity of these personality disorders was questionable. Hence, in DSM 5, although it is categorical, some of the researchers pressurized and came up with the alternative model of personality disorder which takes into dimensional aspect. The categorical classification of personality disorder is based upon 10 separate personality disorders, and each personality disorders has approximately 8 to 10 criteria. That means we are talking about 80 criteria dividing about 10 personality disorders. This division is based on symptomatology or phenomenology based upon their symptoms presence or absence. Unfortunately, there can't be any subsyndromal diagnosis or a borderline case of personality, especially borderline paranoid traits. Can we have that? Or subsyndromal, can it be considered? No. Here, in categorical, it should be distinct and a separate personality disorder. They have a high clinical utility with regard to simple, clear, efficient, and discreetly explainable. And having this purer case of personality disorder is very rare. And research indicates these personality disorders are having clinically heterogeneous. That means they are mixed within the personality disorder clusters across the personality disorders. Sometimes high comorbidity comes into the way of understanding about this personality disorder. The categorical approach at this point of time did not yield much with regard to research. Although there has been various researchers have focused more on borderline personality disorder and later antisocial personality disorder. The remaining 8 personality disorders, the research was very meager. Now let's move into dimensional classification of personality disorder. Dimensional classification of personality disorder refers to the idea that personality traits exist on a continuum. That means a spectrum with the individual varying in the degree of severity to which they possess the certain traits. This dimensional approach assumes that personality traits are continuous and measurable, and that individual can be differentiated by their scores on different traits. Each characteristic symptom is dynamic, and presence of a manifestation in severity is based on the external environment and stress. For example, a person may not have impulsivity in a normal condition. Under highly stressful situation, he may start showing impulsivity. That means even the trait can be expressed under stressful situation, and he may not show those symptoms of impulsivity in a normal time. That means dimensional approach gives a scope for the symptoms to move around. That is, it is a spectrum based upon the environment and stimulation. These expression of personality traits move around. Dimensional approach also gives an opportunity to understand from this personality trait do not come in a purer form. That means it comes in a mixture of traits and across the cluster, and also across the disorders, including higher prevalence rate of other comorbid psychiatric condition. Let's understand how these personality disorders have been classified under ICD-11. Yes, in ICD-11, they have taken the approach of dimensional. They have completely squashed the categorical approach of personality disorder. That means there has been a paradigm shift from categorical to dimensional approach. This is based upon the trait domain. Qualifiers are on the attempt to distill personality description into meaningful dimensions. If you look at the dimensional classification of ICD-11 personality disorders, it has been classified into personality disorder such as severe, moderate, mild, and unspecified. If you look at the trait domain and the pattern specifier, it has been divided into five: negatively affectivity, detachment, dissociality, disinhibition, and anankasia. And further, because of the various clinicians' stress or a pressure tactics, ICD-11 also kept borderline pattern. Let's understand the DSM V alternative model of personality disorder based on the dimensional approach. Here, if you look at this diagram, you will be able to appreciate there are two important criteria have been placed. One, that is A, level of personality functioning. That is, personality function with regard to self and self identity and self direction. Further, interpersonal empathy and intimacy. That means how a person relates to himself with regard to his identity and his direction in life. Similarly, how he deals interpersonal relationship, whether he is able to empathize with people and whether he is able to have intimacy and emotional reciprocation with others. If you look at the pathological personality traits, you can see negative affectivity, detachment, antagonism, disinhibition, and psychoticism. Further, the domain level, they have moved out from 10 personality disorder to 6. They have allowed these domains, that is schizotypal, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and AAPD. Let's understand how the approach of alternative model has been considered. In the step 1, please assess the impairment in personality functioning with regard to self and interpersonal. With regard to self, it is identity and self direction. With regard to interpersonal, empathy and intimacy. Once you are able to understand about the step 1, move to sub step 2, that is pathological personality traits. Whether he has negatively affectivity is there, detachment, antagonism, disinhibition, and psychoticism. Whether they score high or low in this area, and try to find out which are the traits and how they are interacting. Further, step 3A, apply criteria A and B and try to see whether they have classical categorical approach such as antisocial personality disorder, avoidant personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic, and OCPD, and finally schizotypal personality disorder. And finally, you can 3B step where apply criteria A and B for personality disorder and trait specified. And here you look into the whether the person has moderate or greater impairment in personality functioning. One or more pathological personality traits can be considered here. Step 4 is to see whether there are some inclusion and exclusion criteria, whether these personality symptoms are secondary to any medical condition, substance use, drugs, or any other medical condition which can cause similar kind of behavior. If you look at the dimensions of classification of personality disorder, each is arrived from five-factor theory of personality. As I mentioned earlier, Gordon Allport gave 4,000 traits and finally it was reduced to 175. Hans Eysenck came with a three model of universal trait, that is introversion, extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism. These trait theories were subject to research and various statistical tools were applied, and finally, through the cluster analysis, five-factor theories to form dimensional personality disorder was came. These five-factor theory has been researched very well across the globe and across psychiatry and psychological community. Let's look into the five important traits. One is neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and consciousness. And on each of this domain, you will score high or low. And based upon the score, you can see how you can map the spectrum. In the openness is scoring 70. On consciousness, it is 95. Extroversion 47. Agreeableness 76. And neuroticism 48. Although these marking may be variable based upon the stress or else without stress. Based upon the environmental condition, these rating may also vary to some extent. This dimensional approach of personality disorder is based on factor analysis, that is applying statistical method, looking at the severity of each of the trait, how much functionality is there within the person. Finally, many dimensional models have been present and many researchers have proposed various traits, but unfortunately, any of them are contested. Many of them are still in research process. Hence, it is difficult to interpret the findings, difficult to categorize and communicate with other treatment providers. Insurance reimbursement is a big challenge because we do not have well accepted various dimensional classification of personality disorder. Although research indicates dimensional approach is the only way to forward, still this model does not explain the complete personality disorder as a disorder. To conclude, my dear friends, currently the personality disorder is based on categorical approach. Here, the symptoms are organized either in the checklist based categories, that is presence or absence of symptoms, and symptoms are organized as a spectrum in dimensional approach. That means each trait is placed on a continuum scale of 0 to 100. If he has 100% of those dimensional symptom, he will be given 100. But unfortunately, the research does not support categorical approach. It indicates towards dimensional approach. Currently, the classificator system, both ICD and DSM, are moving towards the dimensional approach, and we can see there is a paradigm shift from categorical to dimensional approach. Dimensional approach gives flexibility with regard to functionality, severity of the trait symptoms, and also we can consider various traits and a mixture of those traits presents based upon the person's life event. And invariably, the current literature indicates the combination of both categorical and dimensional approach, which is a hybrid approach, is the best at this point of time. Thank you very much for giving your valuable time. Stay safe.